Imagine this. It's a crisp March morning in 1933, and as the nation tunes in to a new president's inaugural vow to conquer fear, shadowy figures in smoke-filled boardrooms are racing against an invisible clock. In just 48 hours, the lifeline of America's economy, its entire banking network, will freeze solid, locking away fortunes and futures. What if I told you that the blueprint for this catastrophe, a weekend that redefined trust in money itself, is echoing in today's markets more than ever? Buckle up, because we're diving into the heart of the 1933 banking crisis, a story of whispers turning to panic and a system teetering on the edge of oblivion. Our tale unfolds against the grim backdrop of the Great Depression, where the scars of 1929's Wall Street crash still festered like open wounds. Picture families scraping by in breadlines, factories silent as ghosts, and a sense of dread hanging over every doorstep. Yet, beneath the surface, the real monster wasn't unemployment or empty shelves. It was the fragility of America's banks, institutions that millions relied on to safeguard their dreams. By early 1933, the pressure had built to a boiling point, and one state's desperate gamble would ignite a national inferno. Let's rewind to understand the hidden gears grinding away in this machine. Banks aren't vaults overflowing with gold. They're engines of credit, lending out deposits to fuel homes, businesses, and bold ventures. They keep only a fraction of that money on hand, maybe 10%, betting that not everyone will demand their cash at once. It's a delicate balance, a high-wire act over a chasm of insolvency. But when fear strikes, that balance shatters. A bank run erupts. Depositors swarm like a storm, pounding on doors for their savings. The bank can't pay out fast enough, even if its loans are sound, assets tied up in mortgages or bonds that can't be liquidated overnight. Illiquidity becomes instant ruin, and one failure sparks the next, rippling like dominoes in a gale. From 1930 to 1933, this nightmare repeated relentlessly. Over 9,000 banks, nearly a third of the nation's total, crumbled into dust. That's one collapse every few hours, each one poisoning the well of public confidence. Rumors flew faster than telegraph wires. The bank in Springfield went under. Get your money out! Families, already battered by joblessness hovering at 25%, withdrew in droves, draining reserves and forcing solvent banks to the brink. Governors watched helplessly as foreclosures piled up, loans soured, and the money supply evaporated. The system wasn't broken. It was bleeding out, one panicked withdrawal at a time. But no state felt the blade sharper than Michigan, the beating heart of America's auto empire. Detroit, once a roaring titan of innovation, now echoed with the ghosts of shuttered assembly lines. The 1929 crash had gutted car sales, leaving factories idle and workers destitute. Banks in the Motor City were drowning in toxic debt, loans to bankrupt automakers, properties seized from families who couldn't pay rent. By February 1933, the dam was cracking. At the epicenter stood the Union Guardian Trust Company, Michigan's behemoth, propped up by a fragile merger but buckling under the weight of $250 million in shaky assets. Whispers of insolvency spread through the financial district, and the governor's office buzzed with urgent pleas. Enter William Comstock, Michigan's steadfast governor, a man thrust into a maelstrom he could scarcely control. On February 14th, Valentine's Day of all ironies, Comstock stared down the abyss. Reports flooded in. Runs on smaller banks were escalating, and Union Guardian teetered on collapse, threatening to drag the entire state economy into the void. With no federal backstop in sight, the new president wasn't even sworn in. Comstock made a radical call. He declared a statewide bank holiday, closing every institution for 8 days. It was a tourniquet on a severed artery, bold, untested, and born of sheer desperation. Michiganders woke to headlines screaming crisis, checks bouncing, payrolls frozen. Factories ground to a halt, grocers bartered for scraps. In Lansing and Detroit, the air thickened with uncertainty. Would this save the banks or condemn the state to chaos? As February bled into March, Michigan's quarantine became a pressure cooker, its effects seeping across borders. Investors in New York and Chicago nervously eyed their Midwestern ties, pulling strings to safeguard portfolios. The national banking mosaic, already fractured, began to quiver. Then, on March 4th, the spotlight swung to Washington. Franklin Roosevelt, the incoming president, ascended the Capitol steps amid cheers and camera flashes. His voice crackled over radios nationwide. "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Noble words, but behind the pomp, a storm brewed. Bankers from coast to coast huddled in private, phone lines burning with frantic negotiations. Reserves dwindled. Vaults echoed empty. Roosevelt's team, sensing the tinderbox, prepared a drastic remedy. The weekend arrived like a thief in the night. Saturday, March 4th through Monday, March 6th. Ordinary Americans savored what they thought was routine. Families picnicked in early spring sun. Kids played stickball in the streets, oblivious to the seismic shift underground. But in gilded offices, the elite orchestrated a survival pact. Governors in state after state echoed Comstock's decree, shuttering branches piecemeal. By Sunday, the patchwork had spread to over a dozen states, a frantic bid to stem the hemorrhage. That evening, as dusk settled, Roosevelt conferred with his inner circle. Intelligence painted a dire picture. Runs accelerating, currency hoarded under mattresses, the dollar's faith fracturing. The president-elect couldn't wait for Congress. The nation hung by a thread. Dawn broke on Monday, March 6th, and with it, the hammer fell. Roosevelt invoked emergency powers under the Trading with the Enemy Act, a wartime relic twisted for peacetime peril, proclaiming a nationwide bank holiday. Every bank, from the mighty Chase in Manhattan to the corner savings in small-town Ohio, slammed shut. No withdrawals, no transfers, no business as usual. For the 130 million souls across the land, it was apocalypse now. Paychecks undeliverable, mortgages unpaid, life's rhythms halted cold. Grocery lines snaked for blocks, bartering revived in dusty markets. Wall Street, that symbol of capitalist might, stood silent, its traders adrift in a sea of speculation. The implications cascaded like an avalanche. Businesses, starved of credit, furloughed workers en masse. Unemployment, already a scourge, spiked further. Farmers couldn't ship harvests. Exports stalled at ports. The money multiplier, that alchemy turning deposits into economic fuel, ground to zero, contracting the money supply by nearly 15% overnight. Confidence, the invisible glue of markets, dissolved into distrust. Yet, in this void, a phoenix stirred. Roosevelt's team audited banks with ruthless precision, weeding out the rotten from the redeemable. The Federal Reserve, long criticized for inaction, pumped liquidity into survivors. By March 9th, select banks reopened under strict controls, their solvency certified. Greenbacks flowed again, and with them, a tentative hope. But why does this frozen weekend matter in our hyper-connected digital age? Because the skeletons of 1933 rattle in boardrooms today. Look around. Shadow banking, where trillions lurk in unregulated pools. Flash crashes triggered by algorithms gone rogue. Debt bubbles inflating in real estate and crypto. Central banks wield unprecedented power, yet runs can still erupt. Remember Silicon Valley Bank's tumble in 2023, a modern echo of panic? The patterns persist. Overlending, rumor-fueled withdrawals, the illusion of endless liquidity. Understanding Comstock's bold stand and Roosevelt's decisive stroke isn't just history. It's a radar for spotting cracks before they spiderweb. As the sun set on that fateful Monday, America glimpsed its vulnerability. Money isn't just paper or pixels. It's trust, fragile as glass. The 1933 holiday didn't end the Depression. That took years of innovation and grit. But it forged the FDIC, insured deposits, and rebuilt faith in the system. Today, as we navigate volatile markets and geopolitical tremors, remember this. Collapses don't announce themselves with fanfare. They whisper through closed doors, escalate in weekends of worry, and strike when least expected. So, keep your eyes on the signs. The next bank holiday might not close vaults, but it could rewrite your financial future. What patterns do you see emerging now? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if this deep dive gripped you, and subscribe for more unfiltered looks at the forces shaping our wealth. The story of money never ends. It's just getting started. Imagine a single thread unraveling in the fabric of a nation's economy. One bank's failure that could pull the entire American financial system into chaos. In the depths of the Great Depression, with families scraping by on empty promises, what if one desperate decision by a state governor ignited a firestorm that threatened to burn down everything? This is the hidden story of how a banking crisis spiraled out of control, forcing a young president to wield unprecedented power and reshaping the very foundations of modern finance. As the winter of 1933 gripped the United States in an icy vice of despair, the eyes of the nation, though they didn't yet know it, were turning toward Detroit. The Motor City's financial arteries were clogged with toxic debt, loans to shuttered factories, worthless deeds to homes reclaimed by banks but unsellable in a ghost economy. Michigan, once a beacon of industrial might, teetered on the edge. At the heart of the storm stood Union Guardian Trust Company, the state's behemoth, bloated with bad bets and bleeding cash. Its collapse wasn't just a local headache, it was a domino poised to topple a chain reaction across state lines, sucking depositors' life savings into the void. Governor William Comstock, a man hardened by the political trenches, stared down this abyss. The choices? Let the beast fall and watch panic erupt like a plague, with lines forming at every teller window from Lansing to Los Angeles. Or seize the reins in a way no leader had dared before, slamming the brakes on the entire state's money machine. The clock ticked mercilessly. Whispers in boardrooms and smoke-filled chambers painted grim pictures. Intertwined loans, shaky reserves, and a public trust hanging by a thread. Comstock knew the hidden mechanics at play, the fragile web of interbank lending, where one failure could freeze credit nationwide, starving businesses and igniting breadlines longer than the eye could see. On a crisp Valentine's Day, February 14, 1933, Comstock rolled the dice that would rewrite history's ledger. In a bold stroke, he proclaimed Michigan's banks shuttered for 8 agonizing days. A bank holiday meant to quarantine the infection. No withdrawals, no checks cashed, just silence in the vaults. The plan? Inspect the ledgers, prop up the salvageable, and mercy kill the rest. Officials hoped it would signal control, a surgical fix to restore calm. But in the shadowy psychology of fear, where rumor outruns reason, this move lit the fuse instead. Panic doesn't wait for permission. The news crackled over radios and headlines. An entire state frozen solid. If Michigan's vaults were so rotten they all needed padlocks, what lurked in the basements of banks from Boston to Boise? Americans, already haunted by soup kitchens and evicted dreams, felt the chill. Fear, that most viral of emotions, leaped borders like a contagion no quarantine could contain. Depositors didn't need facts. They smelled blood in the water. Withdrawals surged, tellers sweated under siege, and the hidden gears of the system ground louder. Banks hoarding cash, loans drying up, factories idling deeper into silence. What started as a Michigan murmur swelled into a national roar. Just 11 days later, on February 25th, Maryland's governor raised the white flag, declaring its own holiday to stem the tide. Ohio followed suit, then Indiana, each announcement a siren call to the fearful. It was a vicious loop. One state's shutdown stoked dread, sparking runs elsewhere, forcing more closures in a domino cascade. By early March, the map of America looked like a patchwork of locked doors. Nearly half the states had either slammed shut their banks or rationed cash like wartime rations. The economic body was convulsing, arteries clogged, heartbeat faltering. Behind the scenes, governors pored over balance sheets stained with red ink, revealing the Depression's deeper scars. Overextended speculation from the Roaring '20s, farm failures from Dust Bowl wins, and a Federal Reserve too timid to flood the system with liquidity. Yet, in the fog of 1933, the full horror stayed shrouded. Information crawled like molasses. Radios reached city ears but skipped rural hollows. Newspapers soft-pedaled the doom to avoid self-fulfilling prophecies. Folks in untouched states heard echoes of trouble but clung to illusions of safety. Our bank's solid. It's those other places. They couldn't see the invisible threads tying their savings to the national nerve center. Runs weren't just physical cues. They were erosions of confidence, where every dollar pulled out weakened the whole. The implications escalated wildly. Businesses couldn't pay workers without loans. Trade halted without settled accounts, and the ghost of hyperinflation, or worse, deflation's death grip, loomed. Fast forward to the eve of destiny, Friday, March 3, 1933, the shadow of Inauguration Day. Franklin Roosevelt, the incoming president, stood on the cusp of power, but the banks were already in freefall. 32 states had barricaded their vaults or choked withdrawals to trickles. $10 here, $20 there, no matter your balance. In the glittering canyons of New York City, the financial heartbeat of America, mobs snaked around blocks, faces etched with desperation. Grandmothers clutched purses, factory hands traded shifts for a shot at their wages. The Federal Reserve, that supposed guardian, cranked presses day and night, dispatching bills by armored train and truck. But supply couldn't match the frenzy. Vaults emptied of big notes, leaving only crumpled singles for the masses. It was rationing by stealth, a prelude to total blackout. Sex 1-5. Dawn broke on Saturday, March 4th, the day Roosevelt would pledge a New Deal to a broken land. But while parades prepped and crowds gathered in Washington, the markets hemorrhaged. New York's runs dwarfed prior chaos. The stock exchange, symbol of capitalist dreams, braced for indefinite shutdown. Trading? A farce without cash to clear deals. Brokers paced empty floors, the air thick with the scent of surrender. Across the land, governors clustered in war rooms with banking czars, maps marked with red zones of collapse. State-by-state firewalls crumbled,
The beast was too vast, too swift. Only a federal hammer could crush it. But Roosevelt's oath came first, and the weekend yawned like an open grave. By nightfall, even the illusion of order frayed. Whispers of total shutdown rippled from Wall Street to Main Street. Sunday, March 5th, dawned under a veil of uneasy normalcy. Church bells tolled, families bowed heads for solace. But in the White House, a clandestine council convened, the air electric with gravity. Roosevelt, president for mere hours, confronted a chasm no predecessor had bridged. Let the runs rage and watch commerce crumble into anarchy. Millions jobless, riots in the streets, the republic's economic soul eviscerated. Or unleash a federal fury, seize control of every bank, rewrite the rules of money itself. Overnight, the abyss deepened. Illinois, at the stroke of midnight, sealed Chicago's towering institutions, its loop a fortress against the horde. This wasn't mere crisis. It was the forge of transformation. The banking system's veins, poisoned by unchecked greed and regulatory voids, now demanded a surgeon's knife, one wielded by Washington. Roosevelt's inner circle, eyes bloodshot from all-night vigils, debated the unthinkable. A nationwide holiday, federal inspections, guarantees for the faithful.
The implications? A government no longer spectator, but referee, injecting billions, insulating deposits, birthing agencies like the FDIC to stand as eternal sentinels. Why does this matter now, nearly a century later? In our hyper-connected world of crypto crashes and flash mobs at ATMs, the ghosts of 1933 whisper warnings. Trust in banks isn't ironclad. It's paper-thin, vulnerable to the same panic algorithms that amplify tweets into tsunamis. We've built firewalls, stress tests, bailouts, but the core truth endures. When fear eclipses facts, no system is invincible. As that tense Sunday faded into dusk, America held its breath. Roosevelt's radical gambit loomed, a line in the sand between collapse and rebirth. In the end, it wasn't just about saving banks. It was about salvaging the American dream from the jaws of despair. The holiday he declared the next day didn't erase the scars, but it halted the hemorrhage, proving that in finance's darkest hour, bold intervention can rewrite destiny. Today, as markets teeter on unseen edges, remember Michigan's spark and the fire it nearly unleashed. The lesson? Vigilance isn't optional. It's the price of prosperity. As the clock struck midnight in Illinois, Chicago's towering financial pillars slammed shut, plunging the heart of America's economy into enforced silence. But that was just the beginning. Dawn broke over the West Coast with a grim finality. California's banks, from the sun-baked vaults of Los Angeles to the foggy harbors of San Francisco, bolted their doors in solidarity. By midday Sunday, the map of open banks across the nation had shrunk to a desperate few, their teller windows besieged by lines that snaked around blocks. Cash was vanishing faster than sand through clenched fists. Closure loomed like a shadow just hours away. The Federal Reserve, that supposed guardian of liquidity, had fired its last reserves, its vaults empty, its promises hollow. In that frozen moment, the pulse of America's money supply flatlined, setting the stage for a revelation few dared whisper. The crisis had outgrown mere bank runs. It was devouring the very arteries of commerce, threatening to drag the entire nation into an abyss where dollars became relics of a bygone trust. Imagine this: a Sunday in March 1933, where the air hung heavy with unspoken dread. What started as scattered state-level holidays, desperate bids to stem the bleeding, had morphed into a nationwide contagion.
Hidden beneath the headlines of failing institutions lay a deeper fracture, one etched into the bones of history. The Great Depression, now in its third merciless year, hadn't just eroded savings. It had exposed the fragility of the monetary machinery that FDR's predecessor, Herbert Hoover, had sworn to protect. Back in the Roaring '20s, wild speculation had inflated a bubble of credit, banks lending on dreams rather than deposits. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the dominoes toppled. Over 9,000 banks had already crumbled, erasing $140 billion in assets, equivalent to trillions today. Yet, as states like Illinois and California raised the alarm, the real peril emerged not from runs on rural outposts, but from the interconnected web of finance that bound Wall Street to Main Street and America to the world. Without banks as intermediaries, the gears of exchange seized up. Factories idled without payroll checks. Grocery lines formed not for food, but for phantom wages. Even the simplest trade, bread for a day's labor, reverted to the crude bartering of a pre-industrial age. This wasn't panic. It was primal regression, a hidden mechanism of collapse that economists like Irving Fisher had warned about in whispers, now roaring to life. As the sun dipped low that Sunday, the stakes skyrocketed, pulling President Franklin Delano Roosevelt into a war room of whispered debates.
His inner circle, battle-hardened by the chaos, laid out paths forward, each laced with unprecedented risk. The first, stand idle. Let the invisible hand of the market claw its way out. But that illusion of laissez-faire had already cost millions their lifeblood. Savings vaporized, homes foreclosed, bread lines swelling to choke city streets. Thousands more banks teetering on the brink would ignite riots, perhaps even topple the fragile order of governance, echoing the labor uprisings that had simmered since the Bonus Army's march on Washington. The second choice, wield the scalpel of federal aid, bolstering the titans while the frail ones folded. States had tried this patchwork. Governor William Comstock in Michigan had begged for scraps from the Fed, only to watch Detroit's auto empire sputter. The contagion was airborne now, too viral for targeted strikes. Propping one bank invited runs on the next, a hydra of distrust devouring from within. Then came the third path, a thunderbolt veiled in secrecy. A blanket shutdown, orchestrated from the White House itself. Seal every vault from coast to coast under federal decree, halting the hemorrhage to allow a forensic audit. Sound institutions would rise anew, the rotten ones purged. This wasn't mere regulation. It was a seismic seizure of private finance by the state, uncharted territory in the Republic's 144-year saga. The Constitution, that sacred blueprint, offered no clear mandate for such audacity. Whispers of overreach echoed the emergency powers debated during World War I. Roosevelt, his polio-scarred frame belying a steel resolve, paced the dim corridors of the executive mansion, the weight of 130 million souls pressing down. Yet even as deliberations dragged into twilight, the crisis surged unchecked, like a storm breaking levees. By evening's chill, dispatches arrived that chilled the blood. The Bank of New York, a bastion dating to Alexander Hamilton's quill in 1784, teetered on the edge of oblivion. This wasn't some fly-by-night lender. It was the cradle of American capital, repository for European crowns and global traders. Its fall would ripple overseas. London's financiers yanking lines of credit, Berlin's exporters facing default, a cascade that could shatter the fragile gold standard tethering world economies. Confidence, that ethereal currency, would shatter. Headlines in Paris and Tokyo would scream of Yankee ruin, igniting panics from the Thames to the Rhine. At home, the psyche fractured deeper. Families, scarred by 3 winters of want, tucked into bed with visions of empty mattresses, no savings to buffer the next eviction. Entrepreneurs tallied ledgers in candlelight, suppliers unpaid, workers fleeing to soup kitchens. Farmers, their soil thawing for a hopeful spring, eyed barren barns, seeds undelivered. The unspoken pact of prosperity, work hard, save faithfully, thrive collectively, dissolved like mist, leaving a society adrift on tides of fear. Dawn on March 6th broke under leaden skies, a harbinger of the reckoning. From the Atlantic's roar to the Pacific's hush, Americans stirred with a knot of terror and fragile optimism, converging on their neighborhood strongholds. Would the brass handles turn? Would tellers dispense the greenbacked salvation? Or had the end arrived, swallowing futures whole? What greeted them was a tableau of authoritarian surrealism. Stern federal marshals at every threshold, proclamations affixed like funeral notices, and rifle-bearing sentinels guarding hordes untouchable as buried pharaoh's gold. Roosevelt had invoked the abyss option. In the witching hour of 1 a.m., his pen etched Executive Order 6102, repurposing the Trading with the Enemy Act, a dusty relic from the Great War's fog, to cloak this radical halt in legality. Every edifice of finance, be it Corner Savings Co-op or Manhattan Trust, ground to stillness. Withdrawals? Denied. Deposits? Suspended. Loans? Paralyzed. The behemoth of American banking lay slain, its heart stilled in unison. The fallout cascaded with biblical force. Overnight, 130 million citizens, every man, woman, and child from factory floors to farmsteads, were severed from their fortunes, pockets echoing with irrelevance. 18,000 institutions, the lifeblood of credit and commerce, synchronized into dormancy. The New York Stock Exchange, that coliseum of speculation, shuttered its gates indefinitely, brokers reduced to ghosts haunting empty trading floors. Beyond borders, the shockwave rippled. Steamers laden with goods idled in ports, invoices unpaid as American buyers stared at frozen accounts. Even Uncle Sam stumbled. The Treasury's coffers, ironically locked by Roosevelt's command, couldn't muster pay for federal clerks or soldiers. International wires buzzed with alarm. The dollar's throne wobbled, whispers of devaluation stirring in foreign chancelleries. This was no mere holiday. It was economic martial law, a gamble that could forge renewal or fracture the Union irreparably. Yet in the annals of crisis, what unfolded next defies the script of chaos. No torches lit the night. No mobs battered bronze doors or bayed for the president's ouster. Instead, a quiet alchemy took hold. For 36 interminable months, they, the Americans, had endured the slow poison of ambiguity. Banks flickering open, then failing, rumors metastasizing like weeds. This blunt severance, draconian as it seemed, injected certainty into the void. Panic, that ravenous beast, recoiled from decisiveness. Lines reformed not in frenzy, but in resolve. Communities bartered ingenuity, eggs for labor, tools for grain, while radios crackled with Roosevelt's impending voice, promising not salvation, but surgery. Why does this echo chamber of 1933 reverberate today as we navigate our own labyrinth of leverage and liquidity? In an era of digital dollars and shadow banks, the ghosts of that Sunday remind us, trust is the thinnest veneer over financial fire. We've tamed runs with FDIC shields and Fed bazookas, yet cracks persist. Crypto volatilities, debt balloons, global supply snarls. Roosevelt's audacity birthed the New Deal's foundations, proving that in the maw of meltdown, bold intervention can cauterize wounds before they fester fatal. But heed the warning. When the system's veins clog anew, will we recognize the barter's whisper before it becomes a howl? The bank holiday wasn't just history's pivot, it was a mirror, reflecting our perpetual dance on the edge of abundance and anomie. In the end, it wasn't the closure that saved America. It was the courage to confront the freeze, thawing a path to rebirth. Imagine this. In the dead of night, as the nation's lifeblood, its banking system, lay frozen in darkness, one man stepped into the void and declared war on the invisible enemy devouring America's wealth. What if I told you that closing every bank in the country wasn't the spark that ignited chaos, but the cold steel scalpel that sliced away the rot? This is the untold story of how a single week in 1933 exposed the fragility of the financial fortress we'd built, and nearly rebuilt it from the ashes. We pick up in the heart of the Great Depression, March 1933, when the air across America crackled with desperation. For 3 agonizing years, the slow bleed of bank failures had left families penniless, factories silent, and dreams shattered. The uncertainty? It was a relentless torment, a shadow that whispered of doom around every corner. But then, on a crisp Sunday evening, President Franklin Roosevelt shattered the silence. With the stroke of a pen, he invoked emergency powers under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Yes, you heard that right. A wartime law repurposed for economic warfare, and slammed shut every bank door from coast to coast. The banking holiday had begun. No withdrawals, no loans, no heartbeat in the vaults. The nation held its breath. What Roosevelt grasped, in a way no leader before him had, was the brutal psychology of panic. Previous presidents, scrambling with timid fixes, had only fanned the flames. State governors, like Michigan's William Comstock, had tried patchwork quarantines, sealing off one bank here, propping up another there, but it was like plugging leaks in a sinking ship with chewing gum. Runs spread like wildfire, trust evaporated, and the crisis metastasized. Roosevelt saw the truth. In a meltdown this deep, half measures were suicide. You couldn't tiptoe around a heart attack. You had to put the patient under and operate. The holiday wasn't just a pause. It was a full system reboot, a radical intervention to excise the poison of doubt. By rendering every bank inaccessible, he leveled the playing field. No more fretting over which institution might collapse next. The fear that had gnawed at the soul of America for years, it evaporated overnight, replaced by a stark, shared reality. For the first time, the crisis wasn't a vague monster in the mist. It was crystal clear, and that clarity, terrifying as it was, brought an eerie peace. As the days blurred into a surreal standoff, the United States hurtled back in time, unraveling a century of financial evolution in mere hours. Picture the streets of New York and Chicago, once pulsing with ticker-tape dreams, now reduced to a barter bazaar straight out of the frontier era. Businesses with fat stacks of cash in their safes, those rare holdouts, limped along on a cash-only diet, haggling over every dime like pioneers trading pelts. But for most, the doors bolted shut. Factories idled, their machines gathering dust because owners couldn't wire funds for coal or cotton. In the countryside, where folks had long distrusted distant banks anyway, life hummed on with a gritty resilience, swapping eggs for tools, milking cows for a neighbor's fence mending. Urban dwellers, tethered to the invisible threads of checks and credits, fared worse. Entire neighborhoods ground to a halt, their dependence on the system's gears laid bare. And the human cost? It cut deepest into the workforce, the backbone of the American dream. Those who'd pocketed their Friday wages before the freeze hit the jackpot, clutching bills like lifelines. But millions more, staring at empty desks on Monday, weren't so lucky. Paychecks? Frozen in limbo. Employers, honorable as they were, couldn't dip into accounts that didn't exist.
Unemployment surged, not from laziness or layoffs, but from a simple, savage cutoff. Jobs, as we'd come to know them, steady salaries wired to accounts, dissolved into a haze of IOUs and trade. A mechanic might fix your Model T for a sack of potatoes. A teacher could tutor kids in exchange for fresh bread. It was employment reborn in raw, immediate form, stripping away the illusions of security. Yet amid the scramble, something profound shifted in the national psyche. The endless dread of, will my bank survive, gave way to a collective exhale. Everyone, farmer, factory hand, financier, was adrift in the same uncharted waters. No favorites, no escapes. That equality in adversity? It forged a strange solidarity, a calm forged in the fire of necessity, even as the economic wounds deepened. Behind the scenes, Roosevelt's war room buzzed like a hive under siege.
His inner circle, advisors, economists, and a legion of federal sleuths launched the most audacious audit in history. Over 18,000 banks, from sleepy rural outposts to Wall Street behemoths, fell under the microscope. Inspectors fanned out like detectives in a noir thriller, poring over ledgers by lamplight, sifting truth from fiction. What would take years in normal times, they compressed into a frantic 4-day sprint. The stakes couldn't be higher. Verdict too harsh, and you'd euthanize solid institutions, choking off credit to the heartland. Too soft, and the weaklings would lure depositors back only to trigger fresh panics, unraveling the fragile trust all over again. As the reports trickled in, the full horror emerged. A revelation that would stun even the most jaded observer. 3 years of depression hadn't just dented the system, it had hollowed it out. 1/3 of America's banks, thousands of them, were beyond salvage, their books a graveyard of bad loans and vanished deposits. Another third teetered on the edge, solvent on paper, but starved for capital. They'd need a federal lifeline to stagger back. Only the final third stood firm, ready to fling open their doors without a dime of bailout. This wasn't a hiccup. It was a systemic gutting, hidden behind official optimism and banker bravado. The foundation of U.S. capitalism, that gleaming engine of growth, had crumbled far worse than the headlines ever confessed. And as the holiday dragged on, the fallout rippled outward like shockwaves from a bomb. By Thursday, March 9th, the 4th day of lockdown, the initial terror had hardened into resolve. Roosevelt's aides watched in awe as Americans, against all odds, adapted. Barter markets sprang up in town squares. Families pooled resources, rediscovering community in the crisis. But don't mistake grit for victory. The damage was compounding, a silent avalanche burying the future. Farmers in the Dust Bowl heartland couldn't secure seed or fertilizer. Suppliers, spooked by the freeze, demanded cold cash that didn't exist. Assembly lines in Detroit choked to a stop, raw steel piling up unpaid for at the gates. Even hospitals dimmed their lights, haggling with pharmacists over barter for bandages because the credit web had snapped. Decades of innovation, the checks, the wires, the loans that fueled railroads and skyscrapers, collapsed into a primitive scramble for specie. Gold coins, if you had them, became king. I owe us, worthless whispers. What Roosevelt was engineering wasn't just domestic triage, it was a high-wire act with the world watching. Across the Atlantic, the tremor hit like a tsunami. European vaults overflowed with American paper, billions in deposits and bonds now iced solid. British lenders in the City of London faced a cash crunch as their Yankee assets turned to vapor. French bankers scrambled to cover gaps, while jittery investors yanked gold from old-world safes, shipping it stateside in armored holds or burying it in backyards. The spark that flickered in far-off Michigan had ignited a global inferno, threatening to topple the post-war financial order. Could one nation's reset save the world, or drag it all down? Yet, as Friday, March 10th dawned, a faint light pierced the gloom. The inspector's verdict on the big players, the titans of finance, rolled in, and it wasn't the apocalypse some had braced for. Many of the heavyweights were tougher than expected, their balance sheets holding firm amid the storm. Whispers of selective reopenings began to circulate. Sound banks, certified and reinsured by a new federal backstop, would unlock their vaults under strict limits. It was a lifeline, a signal that the surgery might succeed. Looking back, that fateful week stands as a mirror to our own era of flash crashes and fiat uncertainties. Roosevelt's gamble revealed a timeless truth. In the face of systemic dread, bold, unified action isn't recklessness, it's redemption. Americans didn't just endure, they reinvented survival, proving that beneath the layers of modern finance beats a resilient core. But the scars lingered, a warning etched in history. Ignore the fractures too long, and the house of cards collapses. Today, as we navigate digital dollars and debt mountains, the lesson echoes. Clarity in crisis isn't a luxury, it's the only path to dawn. What hidden weaknesses lurk in our banks now? The next holiday might just test us all over again. Imagine this. It's March 1933, and the United States teeters on the edge of total financial collapse. Every bank in the country is shuttered, vaults locked tight, and millions of Americans stare at empty pockets, wondering if their life savings have vanished into thin air. But beneath the chaos, a single, shadowy decision is about to rewrite the rules of money itself, potentially saving the nation or dooming it to anarchy. What if the key to averting disaster wasn't gold or legislation, but something far more fragile? Human belief. As the dust settled from the initial shockwaves of Michigan's banking meltdown, which had rippled outward like a financial plague, a tentative light pierced the gloom on Friday, March 10th. Franklin Roosevelt's team of inspectors had just wrapped up their frantic audits of the country's biggest banks, and to everyone's astonishment, the verdict wasn't as apocalyptic as predicted. Sure, thousands of those scrappy, small-town institutions, mom-and-pop operations dotting the heartland, were doomed, their doors sealed for good, buried under mountains of bad loans and shattered dreams. But the powerhouses anchoring New York, Chicago, and San Francisco? They held firm. Solid ledgers, enough liquidity to keep the engines of commerce humming. These were the lifelines, the behemoths capable of propping up factories, farms, and families, if only the public could be convinced to plug back in. Yet, here's where the real intrigue begins. The numbers on paper meant nothing without trust. Roosevelt knew this better than anyone. He'd seen the Great Depression chew through fortunes and faith alike. Picture it. Everyday folks, from factory workers in Detroit to ranchers in the Dakotas, who'd spent 3 grueling years watching neighbors' banks fold like houses of cards. Runs on deposits had turned streets into mad dashes, lines snaking around blocks as people clamored for their cash, only to find the tellers gone, the money gone. Confidence? It was a ghost, evaporated in the smoke of over 9,000 bank failures since 1930. Deposits were promises, your hard-earned dollars parked in a vault because you believed deep down that come payday or rainy day, it'd be there. Checks? Mere scraps of paper, backed by the invisible glue of a system you assumed unbreakable. But now, that glue was dust. Enter the banking holiday, Roosevelt's audacious gambit. Proclaimed just days earlier, it slammed the brakes on every bank from coast to coast, halting the hemorrhage of withdrawals that threatened to bleed the economy dry. It was a desperate halt to the panic, a nationwide timeout to sort the wheat from the chaff. But reopening, that was the true minefield, a high-stakes poker game where the pot was America's future. If the public surged back to those counters the second the lights flickered on, demanding every cent in a frenzy of fear, the whole charade would crumble. We'd be right back to square one, only worse, with trust not just broken, but pulverized. Roosevelt's plan hinged on psychology, that slippery beast of mass belief. Could he orchestrate a resurrection of faith in time? To understand the gravity, we have to peel back the layers of that fateful weekend in March 1933, a whirlwind of whispers and warnings that reshaped the shadows of power. It started with the dominoes falling state by state, governors like Michigan's William Comstock scrambling in the dead of night to declare their own holidays, buying precious hours as the crisis metastasized. Emergency huddles in smoke-filled Capitol rooms where bankers paced like caged lions, dialing frantic pleas to their counterparts across state lines. "Hold the line," they'd urge, voices cracking over crackly phone wires as rumors of runs spread like wildfire. These weren't just administrative maneuvers. They were the frantic pulse of a system on life support, each delay a threadbare bandage on a gaping wound. And at the eye of the storm stood Roosevelt, the new president, sworn in amid whispers of revolution. His choice that weekend wasn't born of textbooks or timid advisors. It was a radical stroke, the kind that history books either hail as genius or damn as hubris. With a stroke of the pen, he ordered the shutdown of every single bank in the United States, a blanket freeze that echoed through Wall Street to Main Street. It was destruction as salvation. Torch the infected branches to save the tree. Inspectors swarmed in, licensing only the soundest survivors, about half the total, to relaunch under federal scrutiny. The weak? Left in the rubble. Their failures contained. But in that calculated demolition, something profound shifted. The reopened banks emerged battle-hardened, bound by new federal reins that would birth the FDIC, ensuring deposits and forging a safety net the world had never seen. As the implications snowballed, the stakes climbed to dizzying heights. This wasn't mere triage. It was a surgical rewrite of capitalism's DNA. The old Wild West era of unchecked speculation, where banks gambled depositors' money on wild ventures, fueling booms and inevitable busts, faced its reckoning. Roosevelt's holiday injected government muscle into the mix, transforming banking from a free-for-all into a regulated fortress. Global markets, already jittery from the Depression's grip, watched breathlessly. If America faltered, the shockwaves could topple Europe, ignite hyperinflation abroad, and drag the world into a deeper abyss. But if it worked, it would prove that faith could be rebuilt, brick by federal brick, stabilizing not just dollars, but the very idea of economic security. Why does this echo so urgently today? In our hyper-connected age of flash crashes, crypto volatility, and trillion-dollar bailouts, the ghosts of 1933 haunt every headline. We've seen runs on digital banks, panic sells in stock apps, and trust eroded by scandals from Enron to Silicon Valley Bank. Roosevelt's weekend reminds us that beneath the algorithms and apps, finance is still a house of cards built on belief. One viral tweet, one policy misstep, and the psychology unravels. Yet it also offers a blueprint. Bold intervention can cauterize the wound, turning crisis into catalyst for reform.
As interest rates spike and recessions loom, we're reminded that the system's fragility isn't ancient history, it's the undercurrent of now. In the end, that March weekend didn't just patch a broken economy, it redefined what money means in a modern world. Roosevelt didn't save banks, he saved belief, pulling America back from the brink and launching an era of guarded prosperity that shaped the 20th century. But the lesson lingers like a shadow. Ignore the psychology at your peril. In the grand theater of finance, trust is the invisible director, and when it exits stage left, the curtain falls on everything we hold dear.
What hidden signs are we missing today as the next storm brews? The answer might just determine if history repeats or evolves.